Hello and welcome to another episode of Judge of Character. As always, I'm your host, Steve. Well, kids, Valentine's Day is just around the corner, and you know what that means? Singles everywhere will be able to gloat over their relationship status, leaving us single folk to our own devices.
No! Don't let go! You could have just moved over, and he could have gotten in the floating door, and you both would have lived a long, happy, wonderful life. Ah, God, I'm alone.
Every year. Anyway, in celebration of the holiday of love, it's time for a top 10 countdown! This is a countdown of my top 10 favorite fictional couples. These are the couples that we either try to emulate their relationships, or we actively try to avoid. Either way, let's get straight to the lovin' and get this countdown started.
Number 10. Lily and Marshall from How I Met Your Mother.
We're starting this countdown off with a relationship that most of us can only dream of having, in all its dysfunctional glory. And we're only talking about one of the relationships from this particular show.
How I Met Your Mother was a television sitcom that ran from 2005 to 2014 and was about Ted Mosby telling his kids about, well, how he met their mother. Technically, the bulk of the show is a bunch of flashbacks narrated by the future Mosby, who sounds an awful lot like the dad from Full House.
While the show is about Ted and his adventures in love, the show also featured a beta couple in the form of Lily and Marshall, friends of Ted who started the show off engaged, later got married, and even had their first kid during the show's run.
They make the list because this is one of the more realistically done couples out there. Lily and Marshall love and are deeply devoted to each other, but even they have problems and arguments. One major plot point early in the show was how Lily wanted to attend an art school in San Francisco. This started a fight between the two that ended with them breaking up. Lily eventually comes back and tries to get Marshall to forgive her, but he refuses. It takes almost half the season for them to eventually let it go and get back together, which is a really long time in TV land.
Seriously, in a medium where it can sometimes take as little as 2 episodes to completely restore the status quo, that was amazing. However, their arguments and differences aren't the only reason they make this list.
The other reason is how they represent couples in general. How I Met Your Mother is basically a show about love and relationships, with the different characters representing different aspects of it all. Lily and Marshall represent the more mature and loving couple dynamic, often acting as the sort of parents to the rest of the group. While they often have their wacky moments, they're still the more stable relationship in the show.
Just don't piss Lily off. Someone peed in my pants!
Number 9. Scott Pilgrim and Ramona Flowers.
Sometimes great couples come from less than desirable circumstances. And this is a great example of exactly that.
When you have to enter into life or death battles against your partner's exes in order to date them, either you have made a grievous mistake, or you're in Canada, apparently. But that's exactly what happens in the hit comic series and its film adaptation. Scott Pilgrim, a lazy 20-something, meets and falls for Ramona Flowers, a fellow 20-something from America who changes hair color more often than most people change their socks.
That was a horrible analogy, and I apologize profusely for it. Anyway, at first glance, this seems like a simple setup for them to get together. But boy howdy do things change quick.
Scott learns that in order to date Ramona, he has to fight and defeat her 7 evil exes. At the same time this is going on, he has to deal with his own problems as a person and how they affect his relationship with Ramona.
And this is why they get the number 9 spot. Scott and Ramona both have issues that they both have to work through together to actually work as a couple.
Everything from past negative experiences to old flames seems to pop up and try and keep the two apart. But in the end, the two manage to reconcile their differences and issues and manage to earn their happy ending. Hopefully. Number 8. Fry and Leela from Futurama.
Oh, it's the classic fairy tale. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets cryogenically frozen for 1,000 years and then wakes up in a future where robots and aliens are common. Boy meets one-eyed, purple-haired mutant girl. Boy falls in love with one-eyed, purple-haired mutant girl. Boy tries to win her affections for several seasons, only to be rebuffed. Yeah, it's that kind of story.
Futurama, the hit sci-fi series from Simpsons creator Matt Groening, was about a pizza delivery boy who gets frozen on New Year's Eve 1999 and wakes up in the year 3000 and all the adventures he has in the future, including befriending a drunken robot and meeting his distant nephew, who's a doddering old professor. While it had plenty of comedy like its sister show The Simpsons, Futurama also had plenty of dramatic and heartfelt moments too. And many of the more heartfelt moments came from the main characters, Philip J. Fry and Taranga Leela.
Fry and Leela's tumultuous relationship is an interesting one, to say the least.
Throughout the show, Fry would constantly try to get with Leela, only for her to rebuff his advances. Which makes sense, as Fry is pretty damn stupid, to be completely honest. However, despite his obvious lack of intelligence, Fry eventually wins her over after continually showing himself to be a good person overall, and someone who genuinely cares for Leela regardless. In fact, Fry's devotion to Leela often makes for some of the more touching moments in the series.
Fry's devotion to Leela and their eventual coupling helps to show that sometimes it pays to be a nice guy. Oh, you know damn well that's not what I mean.
Number 7. Roger and Jessica Rabbit from Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Ah! The couple that made us jealous of a damn rabbit.
If you grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, you remember this movie for a lot of reasons. Between the animation and how they interacted with the real actors, and the story, and the actors themselves, this was a phenomenally good movie. Plus, there was the fact that we actually saw Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny on the screen at the same time. Oh, and then there was Jessica. Let's face it, Jessica kickstarted puberty for almost a whole generation of boys, and even now, so long after the movie's release, there's still fan art being made of her.
Don't believe me? Just go Google Julius Zimmerman and Jessica Rabbit and see what comes up. Or rather, don't. Not unless you're into pictures of Jessica Rabbit getting into hot, steamy lesbian sex with Lara Croft. But anyway, we're not here to talk about just her. We're here to talk about her and her husband Roger.
True, when most people think of this movie and of Roger and Jessica Rabbit, they don't think too much of the relationship itself. They're focused more on the story and other things. But if you stop to think about it, Roger and Jessica are really a loving couple. For one, when Valiant asks Jessica what she sees in Roger, she replies that he makes her laugh.
Now, that might seem like something you'd see in like an online dating profile, but it actually makes a lot of sense here. You see, Roger and Jessica are toons, and the whole basis of toon culture is laughter, so laughter is a big deal for them. Basically, Jessica just used the toon equivalent to say that Roger had a big, well, you know.
But that's not all, folks. Jessica shows that despite some of her more questionable moments, she really does love her husband. The famous patty cake moment? Sure, it was essentially adultery for toons, but she did it to help her husband. And while she may have knocked him out with a frying pan and shoved him into a trunk, she did at least have his best interest in mind.
So yeah, while we may remember Jessica and Roger for naughtier reasons, let's not forget that beneath all of that is a couple who truly do love and care for each other. Get out of here!
Number 6. Han Solo and Leia from Star Wars.
Okay, this one's on the list just because it's cool.
Admit it, at some point or another after watching the original trilogy, you wanted to be just like Han Solo. Cool, suave, and able to pull off shit like this.
I love you.
I know.
I mean, come on! No one else could say shit like that and get away with it.
Staying sexy is an all-day job. And for some of us, the end of the day is just the beginning.
I stand corrected. And I don't feel too bad about it.
In any case, while we don't know too terribly much about the relationship itself, unless you actually read the now void expanded universe, that's okay. This is one of those couplings that just seems to run on cool. And in this case, that's enough.
I love you.
I know.
Don't you dare open another tab. Judge of Character will be right back. See, I told you the show would come back. Number 5. Superman and Lois Lane.
Relationships all have problems. But what do you do when the person you love is in love with your superhero alter ego? You see, this was one of the many problems that the Man of Steel faced when it came to Lois Lane.
This relationship is perhaps one of the best known ones in history. Almost everybody knows about these two, even if they don't know anything about the franchise itself. Superman and Lois Lane is about as iconic as...
Well, to be honest, I don't have any comparisons. This coupling is so iconic, it's just its own icon.
But why? Lots of reasons, but perhaps the biggest one was the initial love triangle the two found themselves in.
You see, Lois is in love with Superman, who has an alter ego named Clark Kent, who's in love with Lois. But Lois doesn't love Clark because she's in love with Superman, who's really Clark Kent, who loves Lois because Lois loves Superman. No, I've gone cross-eyed.
Bottom line, there was strange romance going on for a while, which finally ended when the two got married and Superman finally revealed the truth. Since then, Supes and Lois have been one of the de facto comic book relationships in history.
Ugh. At least until the New 52 came out and it was revealed that Superman was dating Wonder Woman instead. Which I'm sure made fanfic writers everywhere rejoice.
Number 4. Kimberly and Tommy from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
You remember what I said about how Jessica Rabbit helped to catapult a whole generation of boys into puberty? Well, it happened again in the 90s, thanks to Kimberly Hart from the Power Rangers.
Kimberly was the Pink Ranger from the original show and was played by Amy Jo Johnson, who I swear to God is only just now starting to age. Anyway, when the show premiered, Kim quickly attracted the attention of teen boys everywhere, making her one of the more popular characters on the show.
And probably one of the most fantasized ones as well.
Later on, when Jason David Frank joined the cast as Tommy Oliver, the two were quickly paired up, making them one of the first and most well-known couples to ever appear on the show in its long history.
And don't forget, also killing the hopes and dreams of young boys everywhere.
One of the reasons this pairing is so popular among fans, even now, is that it was seemingly a simple and pure one. It was love between two teenagers, so there was a lot of chaste moments, and nothing too serious.
But all that comes to a screeching halt in Power Rangers Zeo when Kimberly breaks up with Tommy using a Dear John letter. Excuse me.
I hated this moment so much. Not because I rabidly shipped the pairing, which I do, but because it was so out of character.
You know, I get that the writers wanted Tommy to get with the new girl, Catherine. I do. But there were so many better ways they could have gone about doing it.
I'd concede if it was a matter of Amy Jo not wanting to come back as a guest just for this plot development, but otherwise, this was just lazy writing in order to justify a new pairing.
Sorry, but as some of you might know, this was kind of a tender point with me. Anyway, despite what happened, this is still the most memorable pairing in the show's entire history, and one of my favorites, hence the spot on the list.
Number 3. Wesley and Buttercup from The Princess Bride.
If you thought I wouldn't feature them on a countdown like this, get out.
The Princess Bride is the quintessential romantic fairy tale. It's got almost everything you could want. There's swashbuckling, kings, treachery, and of course, love with a capital L. The story, both in its original book and the film adaptation, is about Wesley and Buttercup and the trials they go through to be together, which include his supposed dying, her being kidnapped, and a warmongering prince, among other things.
The love between these two is one of the purest you will ever find in fiction, which makes it one of the most well-known and loved, no pun intended, love stories.
Of course, the love story is only one of the things that made The Princess Bride popular, but it's still one of the better elements of the whole story, and audiences do love them some Wesley and Buttercup.
Especially when Wesley's played by Cary Elwes. I'm sorry, I gotta admit, the man looks damn good in black.
Number 2. Peter and Mary Jane Parker from Spider-Man.
Before we even begin on this one, no, I will not be covering a certain event in comic book history that may or may not have completely retconned this pairing. As far as I know, such an event does not exist.
I said earlier that Superman and Lois Lane was one of the de facto comic book relationships in history. Well, meet another. In fact, as popular as Supes and Lois are, I think it's safe to say that Peter and MJ are more famous.
There's a couple of reasons for this. Superman and Lois are a comic coupling who go through some more, shall we say, interesting conflicts. But while they're doing that, Peter and MJ have had what you would call a more realistic relationship.
Of course, realism only goes so far in superhero comics. What I mean is that in addition to the more amazing elements of life, the two have had to deal with more mundane problems.
For instance, the fact that MJ was not Peter's original love interest.
That's right, folks. Back when Spider-Man first hit shelves, his love interest was the stunning blonde Gwen Stacy. The two were nigh inseparable, and Gwen was actually meant to be the one. Mary Jane was later brought in as a rival to Gwen for Peter's emotions, but the creators hadn't counted on MJ becoming a huge hit with the fans.
Of course, who could blame them? A stunning redhead like her? We didn't stand a chance. Redheads.
With MJ suddenly becoming immensely popular, there was still the matter of what to do with Gwen. She was still dating Peter, and from all angles it looked like the perfect relationship. With these problems in mind, Marvel did the only sensible thing. They threw her off a bridge.
Okay, to be honest, they didn't kill her just to get Peter and MJ together. Maybe.
Rather, they did it because, according to them, there was nothing else to do with her. They didn't want Peter getting married, and a breakup wouldn't have been realistic. By killing her, at least according to them, it would remove the issue and help reinforce the essence, quote-unquote, of Spider-Man, which is personal tragedy.
Which makes me wonder if the people at Marvel are secretly sadists. But hey, let's face it, if they hadn't offed her, we would have never gotten MJ and Peter.
Peter and MJ's relationship is a great one because despite all the hardships they go through, they still deeply care and love each other. Even if they separate for various reasons in the storylines, they inevitably find their way back to each other in the end.
You hear that, Marvel? They inevitably find their way back to each other in the end!
Peter and MJ. Let's face it, we hit the jackpot with these two.
Now, before I reveal my top pick for this countdown, let's take a look at all of those who didn't make the list. They gave a valiant effort, but just couldn't love enough.
Number 1. Homer and Marge Simpson.
Now, this might seem like an odd choice for some of you. How could The Simpsons beat out everybody else on this list?
It comes down to time and content. While The Simpsons haven't been around as long as other couples on this list, they've been here long enough to have an impact. And while others have been around longer than them, The Simpsons have always had what I think to be one of the most realistic relationships in fiction.
Now, I know some of you are going to disagree, and that's fine. But let's look at some of the facts here.
Let's just all be honest and admit something here. Homer is not a very good husband or father. He's an alcoholic, he's dense as a brick, if not more so, he regularly chokes Bart, which counts as child abuse, and he often doesn't think about others before himself, getting up to hijinks and shenanigans that often cause problems for others, especially his family. The fact that Marge ever fell in love with him is amazing.
However, that's one of the reasons I put Homer and Marge in the top spot. You see, Homer and Marge's relationship is all about overcoming problems.
As we learn in the show, Homer and Marge have been through just about every kind of real-world problem you can think of. Unplanned pregnancies, money woes, neglect, even a short-lived divorce. But through it all, they keep coming back to each other, and in the end, their love for each other is what serves as the backbone for the family. Despite all the troubles they face, they endure it all.
And that's more than enough to put them in the top spot for me. Well, that's it, folks. My top 10 fictional couples. Let me know who you would have picked, as I'm sure you all have a different list in your head than mine. In any case, I'm your host, Steve, reminding all of you to stay in character, and remember to have a happy Valentine's Day. Like me. God, I'm alone.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this episode of Judge of Character, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe, and be sure to check out other episodes to see what I have to say about some of your favorite characters. Until next time, stay wicked.
Ha 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 ha!